Hey everybody, and welcome back to Sweatpants BI. In part 5 of our full-length walkthrough of this customer satisfaction survey infographic design, we're actually going to jump into some of the more fun stuff of designing Power BI tools, and that is going to be our layout, where I'm going to give you all kinds of tips about, setting up your layout, picking your color scheme, and of course integrating different design choices that we can eventually use to take the very basic data visuals that we've already set up about customer demographics, net promoter score, and their experience, and integrate these into our layout to help tell this top to bottom story in our infographic that is going to help someone who knows nothing about this survey sort of quickly glean the most important insights related to these 3 different narratives that we want to make sure that we tell within our infographic to help them get a very quick, very immersive understanding of the results of this customer satisfaction survey. So very, very excited to jump in and actually walk through things like which color choices you can make, and just selecting your theme and your color palette, how we're going to, lay out the 3 main sections of our infographic, from passenger demographics to net promoter score to the overall customer experience, and ultimately how we're going to build an infographic that really pulls the user in and tells a captivating story from this data set. So now we're ready to start putting together our design for our infographic. And so I'm going to go ahead and just start out here in PowerPoint. And the first thing that we need to do is we need to put together a color scheme to carry over into Power BI. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to head over to my design options, and I'm going to drop down all of the themes that are built into PowerPoint, and I'm just going to start looking at these color swatch combinations that are on each of these themes. And what I'm looking for is honestly just something with a nice selection of blues and maybe an orange. And this is all just my personal preference here. My logic, my rationale, if you're curious about it, is just like, hey, this is a customer satisfaction data set for an airline. So maybe I'm trying to evoke, feelings of being in the air, the sky. I'm probably going to go with kind of a sky blue and white aesthetic here. So I'm really looking for something that, even this depth color combination would do, or this Madison option. In fact, I think I like the Madison option. So I'm going to go ahead and just select this. And then I'm going to go over here to my format background settings. And in the window that appears here, the first thing that I want to do when I'm formatting my background is let's just hide all of the background graphics. And for my background color, I'm probably going to go with a gradient, but for now, let's just do a solid fill. And then I want to look at the colors that are in this in this particular theme. You can see I've got kind of a very dark bluish green, kind of a very light green, and then a couple of additional green options. And then I kind of like this blue option that you see here. And then there's even kind of a grayish blue here and an orange. So I'm kind of drawn to this blue and this orange. The reason that I'm checking that I have a blue and an orange is because I want to make sure that if I use something like blue and white as my base color, that I also have a good color that I can use for sort of color pops and highlights. And if I pull up my color wheel here, which again, I would recommend that if you don't have a color wheel bookmarked somewhere in your browser, find yourself a good color wheel and bookmark it, because what this tells us is that if I am picking a color aesthetic or a base color that's kind of in this range of blues here, then probably the best match that I can find for a good, secondary color to sort of highlight and pop out of my data is probably over here in the oranges. We don't necessarily have to go straight across. In fact, I'm probably going to use something more in the yellowish orange for my accent colors. But if you're trying to find 2 good colors for your Power BI layouts and your builds, chances are whatever base color you pick, the best accent color is probably directly across from it and then somewhere in that range. So I'm going to pick a blue here, and my accent color is going to be somewhere here in the oranges. So I can go ahead and get rid of that. And the first thing that I want to do is I want to go ahead and I'm going to go ahead and insert some shapes onto the page. This is how I typically carry over my background colors between PowerPoint and Power BI. Let's just go ahead and create 8 of these squares. I think that's 8. I'm going to go ahead and just grab one, and then I'm going to drag and highlight all of those squares. I'm going to click on my arrange and align settings. I'm going to align everything to the middle, and then I'm going to distribute horizontally to make sure that I've got 8 squares. And then just very quickly, I'm going to select each of these, and I'm going to grab the first color up here. And once I have done all of that, we're going to hop back over to Power BI and open up our canvas settings and our canvas background. And if you will remember, we are currently just using the default color scheme in Power BI, which I've talked at length about how much I do not like the default theme colors in Power BI. So what we're going to do is we're going to replace these 8 colors with the 8 colors that we have over here in PowerPoint that are a part of the Madison theme or whatever it was called. So let's go ahead and head over to View, which is where we access all of our themes. And of course, if we drop this down, we can select any of these colors and swap out the 8 colors that we have as our base colors in this Power BI theme. Or if we want to, let's see what this one looks like, this solar theme, then we can easily swap those out. But what I want to do is I want to carry over the same theme that I'm using in PowerPoint into Power BI. So I'm going to select Customize the Current Theme. And then I'm going to just very, very quickly head back over to PowerPoint. I'm going to drop this down so I can see my color for this square. I want more colors, and then I'm going to grab the hexadecimal code here, and I'm going to copy this over into my first color slot. And then once I've got that, I'm just going to keep going back and forth for each of these squares and grabbing the background color. Then I'm going to head back to PowerPoint. I know that this is a little rinse and repeat, and I have already covered this topic multiple times in some of my other videos. So if you've already seen me do this exercise, by all means, skip over it. I'm doing I'm doing this the same way that I almost always do it. It takes a couple of minutes, and you get to watch me just do the same thing over and over again. Just a few more to go. And as soon as I have grabbed my last color over here, we will be all set. But of course, the reason that we do this exercise is we want to make sure that we're using the same colors in Power BI and PowerPoint in order to make our PowerPoint layout and our Power BI tool, look like they're a part of the same, the same tool. And once we're done here, we can just go ahead and head over to our background canvas settings, make sure that our color swatches here match perfectly with our color swatches here in PowerPoint, and they do. And so now that we've got the same colors, we'll be able to really align the colors and aesthetics of our data visuals to the background layout that we're going to create in PowerPoint. Now in PowerPoint, let's go ahead and start making our actual infographic layout. And the first thing that I'm going to do here is I'm just going to go ahead and pick white as my background color, and we need to resize this canvas because landscape is not going to work for us, right? Our infographic, if you'll remember, is a very long format that is equivalent to 3,000 pixels tall and 1280 wide. Now, figuring out what that sort of relates to in terms of PowerPoint canvas size can honestly take a little bit of trial and error and experimentation. So, usually I have to kind of go back and forth. You might try putting a text box or something right in the middle of the canvas and then go back and forth, exporting the image from PowerPoint, bringing it into the background of Power BI, and basically making sure that the text in the background image does not appear warped or anything like that. So let's start, just to sort of demonstrate what I mean. Let's start by just throwing a text box right here into the middle of the report. Looks like white is currently my font, so let's just go ahead and make this red, and let's make it pretty large. And I'm just going to put this into the middle of my canvas here. And now I'm going to just do a test export of this background image. So let's go ahead and save it to our folder here. I'm going to call this test background. And I'm going to head back over to Power BI real fast. And I'm going to go to my canvas background and I'm going to import that image that I just created. I'm going to change the fit from normal to fit, and I'm going to change the transparency to 0%. Just so you can see, and here, let me go ahead and throw a text box on here as well, so that you can see that test text that I wrote, you can see it's very warped and kind of blurry. What we want is to adjust the size of our PowerPoint canvas until this is no longer warped. So I'm going to go ahead and head back over to PowerPoint, and I'm going to go to my design options, and for my slide size, I'm going to make a custom slide size, and I'm going to save you some of the experimentation. I've already done, several versions of what I'm trying to accomplish here with my infographic, and I'm pretty sure that 30 inches should be pretty much enough. So let's go ahead and set this to ensure fit. There's our test text box right smack in the middle. I'm going to go ahead and resave this. I'm going to save it once again as a JPEG. And let's go ahead and make sure that we're saving it in the right folder. This is our test background. I just want to save this slide. We're going to hop back over to PowerPoint, and I'm going to swap out that test background with the new version. And you can see it's huge, but the text is no longer distorted or stretched, meaning that our canvas size in PowerPoint is now close enough to the canvas size that we have built here in Power BI. Now in PowerPoint, let's go ahead, of course, and get rid of that text box now that we know our image is the right size. And let's go ahead and pick a background color for our entire infographic. And as I said a few minutes ago, what I'm really trying to evoke with this background color is the sky. I really want to use sort of a sky blue theme, something that's going to, make a potential audience or someone looking at this infographic think of an airline and think of the sky. So I'm going to use white as part of my gradient color, and then I'm also going to use my blue here as the other gradient color. And right now my white is at the top and my blue is kind of down here at the bottom. Let's go ahead and just try flipping that so that the blue is up here at the top. And if we want to add even an additional, element of color to this, we can just, I'll do that one more time. If you click just in the middle, we end up with sort of a color that falls between white and the blue that we picked. And that's looking pretty decent to me already. But what I'm going to do is even add one slightly darker touch of blue, for the reason that, of course, the higher up you go, above the ground, or if you're in the plane, you start to see those darker blues in the sky, the higher that you go. So, this is really, starting to kind of evoke the feeling of being pretty high up. So I like this color scheme, and then things are nice and sort of vibrantly white down here at the bottom. The next thing that we're going to do is strictly just a sort of aesthetic choice, but I'm going to drop a rectangle in here, and I'm going to build kind of a makeshift border or boundary for our tool. And you can sort of play with the size a little bit. I like to use the manual sizing options up here. And that's looking pretty decent to me. And now, again, this is just a border, so we're not going to fill this. So I'm going to turn my fill options off entirely. Right now, my the outline color on this boundary is kind of green. But instead of that, I'm actually going to use a gradient for this as well. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to more or less create the same type of gradient that we are using in the background. In fact, I'm just going to delete this middle color and replace it. And now you can see that it's the same gradient, but it's flipped. So my boundary up here is white, and down here it's blue. In other words, this blue is the same color that I'm using up here, and this white, of course, is the same color that I'm using down here. If I were to flip the this outline, what would happen is you're going to see it disappears almost entirely. Whoops, I'm not actually selecting my outline. So let's go ahead and select this, and now you can see that that outline is very, very difficult to see because it bleeds right into our background gradient. So just by flipping it, we end up with a very, very subtle outline that we can see. So let me go ahead and click the outline one more time, and I'm even going to bump up the thickness of this boundary by changing my width, changing it from, about 1 pixel to 2 pixels. I'm even going to zoom in a little bit just to make sure that I can see that boundary pretty well. I might even go a little bit thicker by changing the width to about 2.5, maybe even 3. Okay, that looks pretty good to me. Now let's go ahead and add, one more totally just aesthetic element. I would highly recommend that you don't get too crazy, with your cosmetic bells and whistles. At the end of the day, we really want the data to be the star of the show, but it is an infographic, and we want to definitely take advantage of anything that we can to sort of tell this as rich a story as we can. So what I'm going to do here is I'm going to add another rectangle layered on top of my border, and I'm just going to drag this rectangle all the way down, and I'm going to turn off my outline, and I'm going to turn on a gradient fill for this. And you can see I'm using exactly the same gradient here that I'm using in other parts of my report here. I'm going to zoom in a little bit. If on my computer screen, you probably can't see this, in the video, but on my computer screen, you can just barely make out where the edge of that rectangle is by the subtle difference in gradation between the background color of my canvas and the gradient in this rectangle. But for all intents and purposes, it is basically invisible. And you'll also notice that this rectangle, of course, is cutting off part of my boundary so that my boundary only has 3 sides. And the reason that I'm doing that is I'm going to add a new boundary element into this. I'm going to insert an icon, just one of the PowerPoint icons. And I'm going to grab a plane here. Just a simple plane icon. And I'm just going to drag it into place. And I'm going to put it, pretty much in the top left corner. And I'm going to make it white. You can even experiment with adding something like graphic effects. And if you want to try adding like a drop shadow, no problem at all. And let's go ahead and drop it in just a little bit closer. And the last thing that I'm going to do is I'm going to add one more rectangle here. And for this rectangle is going to, of course, represent sort of the jet stream or smoke trail behind this plane. So let's go ahead and turn off its outline. And I want to zoom in on the plane and make sure that this rectangle is basically lined up with the center of the airplane. Might even have to make it just a little bit longer. And then we want to grab our airplane and we want to bring that forward or bring it to the front so that, of course, the airplane is on top of our makeshift jet stream coming out of the back of the airplane. Now we want to take that rectangle that we created. We're going to add a gradient to it as well, but we're going to give this one sort of an orange gradient, sort of expressing heat. And we're going to just do this like so and see how this looks. Again, the intent of this is for it to be very, very subtle. In fact, that might even be, I think we're getting close to almost too subtle. I mean, the point is for this, sort of jet stream that we're coming up with to be very, very subtle. We don't want this really attracting the eye, but we do want this kind of orange color up here in the top left corner to sort of pull the user or the audience's attention to the brightness up here of this orange. We want the user's eyes to just immediately be kind of yanked up here to this top left corner. And the orange color here, this vividness against this blue background, is just kind of helping pull the eye up here. Now, we want to go ahead and add a title for our report. And we want to pick a font. And I highly recommend keeping your font simple. I almost always go with something like DIN or Segway or Calibri, nothing with a whole bunch of bells and whistles. We're trying to maximize the readability of whatever font that we select. And since Segway is one of the most common fonts in Power BI, we're actually just going to use that here as well. So I'm going to go ahead and pick Segway Light. And I'm actually going to use, I think, kind of a light blue here and see how this works. And, let's just call this Sweatpants Air. That's going to be the name of our airline. I don't think that the airline in this data set had a name. It's just like airline satisfaction data set. So I'm going to name it Sweatpants Air. And I'm going to try to keep things fairly simple. Let's see. That's working pretty well for me. I want people to be able to reference the name of the airline since this is a satisfaction report. But what I really want to set off in big, vibrant colors is the customer satisfaction results 22 piece of this. And so because I want this text to really pop and again just yank the audience's attention right to this text, I'm going to use a much bolder version of the Segway font. I'm going to grab this Segway UI Black, in fact. And yes, this is standing out more than this, but I don't want to be subtle. So let's go ahead and make this white so that it really pops. And I'm even going to add a drop shadow here by going to my text effects and adding a background there. Again, subtlety is overrated. I like for people to just immediately know where to look in this tool. After we have that, let's just go ahead and kind of welcome people to the infographic and sort of tell them, what they're looking at, why they should care about this customer satisfaction survey results 22. And in fact, let's go ahead and just add survey to this. And now down here, let's go ahead and add some text, just kind of welcoming people to the tool. I'm going to go with, let's try just a regular Segway font. I'm definitely going to make this much smaller. And let's greet anyone looking at this infographic with welcome to the results of this year's customer satisfaction survey. Scroll down the page to see a breakdown of key findings from our passengers. And now I'm kind of running against this border, so let's make our text box a little bit smaller. Who flew with us in the past year, and recommendations that are sure to help make Sweatpants Air the preferred carrier of flyers around the world. Again, doesn't have to be anything too fancy at all. We literally just want to make sure that we have something kind of, welcoming people to this infographic that we're spending time developing. And hopefully we're giving them an interest in continuing to read. Now, I'm going to see if there's just any way that I can sort of make this text a little bit easier to consume. So let's go ahead and I think I'm actually going to pick a lighter version of the Segway font. So let's go ahead and try semi-light. And that's looking pretty good. And let's even try finding a looser version of the text. And notice what I did was, I'll do that again. If I select this box and if I go up here to this little AV with the arrows moving in different directions, this allows me to adjust the spacing between the individual characters in the text. So I'm going to loosen this text up a little bit. And personally, I think it's a little bit too loose. I would like for all of this to fit on 3 lines instead of 4. So let me go ahead and go to more spacing. And let's try dropping this down to a 2. Still have a little bit of run over. We'll try dropping this down to a 1.5. That looks pretty decent. Now let's go ahead and add an additional pop of emphasis here for Sweatpants Air. That looks good to me. Again, just enough to kind of, explain to people what they're looking at in this infographic. Next, we want to start actually building out the different sections of our infographic. And of course, if I pull up Power BI, remember that we're going to have a section for demographics, Net Promoter Score, and experience. But that's not all we're actually going to have in the infographic. First, I want to make sure that we have a section that just kind of provides a summary first. For anybody who's in a huge hurry and they don't really have time to read through this entire thing, let's at least go ahead and have a section that sort of calls out the major highlights. So I'm going to add another rectangle here. And, we can always adjust some of this stuff later on, but for now, I think that I'm just going to have this be about 1.8 by 11.5. And we don't need a background on this, but I do want to add a gradient that will sort of contrast this area with the background. And of course, right now Power BI is defaulting to these greens. No big deal. We're just going to swap the greens out with the actual colors that we are using in our background. Can even, for me, I like to have just a little bit more sort of dark in the top left corner. So I'm just grabbing the items that make up the gradient and pulling them out a little bit more to make this area kind of stand out more. That looks pretty good overall. And then now that we have sort of our summary section here, let's go ahead and give this a placeholder name. And we'll call this the view from 30,000 feet, which is just a little bit more, clever than just calling this something boring like summary. Once we've got that text there, let's go ahead and move it over to the left. And let's go ahead and change the alignment of the text to the top of the visual so that it's in the top left corner, and it still looks pretty big to me. So let's go ahead and experiment with some of our segue fonts. Let's go ahead and shrink this down. Let's see how segue looks. That looks pretty okay to me. Now we're going to go ahead and add a drop shadow to this text. So I'm going to click on Shape Format, Text Effects Only, and I'm going to add just a subtle shadow to really make this this text here sort of pop against that dark background even more. And that looks good enough for now. The next section that we're going to create is going to be for our demographics information. And so we're going to need quite a bit of space here for our demographics summary. In fact, I think I'm going to experiment with, let's see how this looks if we just go with 7. And I'm going to actually copy this image, and I'm not going to use my title there. What I'm actually going to do is I'm going to create a second square here that is just going to be kind of my header for this demographic section. So I'm going to kind of stretch this rectangle into place. You can see that I need 11.5 as my rectangle width. I'm going to highlight both of these rectangles. I'm going to align them left and align them top to make sure that they overlap perfectly. Now I'm going to add a new color combination here just to sort of offset my section headers and really pull the eye to this new title here. So this is going to be our, we'll call this passenger demographics. And instead of using the same gradient here, I'm going to change this to a left to right gradient. And I'm going to, instead of using this dark blue, let's use orange, which is our accent color. And now you can see how much this passenger demographic section really pops, which I'm hoping that if I were someone who is reading this report for the first time, that my eyes are first going to be drawn up here to the top left corner, which, sort of prompts me to read this title. And then my attention is immediately pulled down here to passenger demographics. And let's go ahead and copy our passenger demographics section. And I'm going to add it right down here with just a little bit of space. And this section is going to be for our passenger net promoter score. And I'll even put NPS in parentheses, just in case anybody needs to know that this metric might be just called NPS in other visuals for the remainder of the infographic. Now we've got quite a bit of space here for the bottom. So let's go ahead and copy this one more time. And I'm going to kind of drag this down until I get these 2 red arrows on the right that tell me I've got, basically the same amount of space between each section here. And at the bottom here, I've got, a little bit of room to maybe even make this a little bit larger. I don't want to make it too big because I am going to use this space here as well. So let's go ahead and copy. First, let's go ahead and put passenger experience as the header of this section. Then I'm going to grab both of these 2 shapes. I'm going to copy and paste them one more time. And this section down here is going to be my recommendations section. And let's go ahead and grab the bottom of this box, and we're going to go ahead and just pull it up like so. And I'm actually not going to use any kind of fill on this one, but I am going to use, whoops, looks like I accidentally deleted it. So I am not going to use any fill, but I am going to use a gradient on my line. And I want this gradient to be sort of a linear down gradient. And I really want to use my color pop at the bottom. So I definitely want some orange here, and then I want some white. And I also want to go ahead while I'm here and increase the thickness of this outline to 3, just like my border here. Now you can see, I've got my orange outline, and then here's the white part of my outline, which is a little visible here around the outsides. So let's go ahead and click on our outline here. And instead of using white here, I'm going to adjust the transparency to 100% for both of these. What this is going to do is it's going to keep this outline from being visible on other sides here, because really the outline is orange here, but then it stops up here because it becomes completely transparent based on the settings that I gave for these two colors. You can see I'm clicking on this white. I set its transparency to 100%, so it's invisible. Same for this one. And then my oranges here have 0 transparency, which is why we can see them. I'm also, just to offset this recommendations section, since it is different from the other 3 sections and very, very important, let's go ahead and swap the direction of our gradient. So now I've got blue over here and orange over here. Let's go ahead and get rid of the orange. And I'm going to select my dark blue here for my recommendations. And for this blue, I'm going to give it, let's see what 50% transparency looks like. And you can see I've got a little bit of the white background coming through. I'm actually just going to go ahead and make it completely white. And then I'm going to add a touch of my blue back into this. And then what I also want to do is I want to go ahead and make this recommendations text even larger than it is, so that it really attracts the eye. And now we're going to scroll back up through and just see how everything looks. And of course, over here on the left, you can see at a glance what the entire presentation of the customer satisfaction survey results layout looks like. I'm pretty happy with it, but I do think it's missing a couple of things. And that is, I think it's missing just, some additional storytelling elements and maybe some additional cosmetic elements that aren't going to be distracting, but they're really going to drive home this sense of, customer satisfaction or passenger responses. We want to humanize this report a little bit because it's about customer satisfaction data. This entire data set, this entire infographic that we're building represents the voice of our passengers. So how do we add that human element back into this? So the first thing that I would do to build in, that more human element that I think could be missing from this is let's go ahead and add an additional rectangle here. And I'm just going to kind of drag this into place. I don't want it to take up too much space. I can't emphasize that enough because I definitely want to make sure that we don't run out of real estate for our data visuals, which are the most important part of this thing. So let's go ahead and just add in another rectangle. We're going to keep it fairly small here. We're going to remove our outline, and I'm going to make this white just so I can very plainly see how well it lines up everywhere in the report. And I'm going to add one of these white rectangles to each section here. Got a little bit of space here to even expand this down a bit. I want to make sure that there's no spillover or overlap visible with this rectangle and the other rectangles here that make up my background layout. So I'm just going to kind of manually bump this up and move it. Of course, I've got some space here that I need to take up, so let's go ahead and just drag this like so. Okay, and now I've got 3 white squares for each section here. So the first thing that I want to do is let's go ahead and grab this first square, and I'm going to add to the fill here, instead of using a color like these, I'm going to use a picture. And let's go just to stock images, and let's see if we can find some good airline, or let's try airport. Still not a lot of images. I thought that there would be more images for airport, but okay, let's just use airplane instead. And I like this guy. You know, he seems like he's on a plane. He's looking very businessy, very professional. Looks like he's enjoying his flight. Scrolling down through here, I mostly see kids with toy airplanes. That's not really what I'm trying to get at with this customer satisfaction report, but hey, this dude looks like he loves being on a plane, so let's go ahead and insert his image into the background of this rectangle, and immediately you can see he looks super distorted. He's kind of scrunched, so we're going to need to fix that. Let's go to our picture format options. Let's go to crop up here in the top right corner, and let's change this to fit. Still, now it's way too small, so let's try fill. That looks much better. And we're just going to go ahead and grab his image, and I'm just going to kind of drag it like so. And I'm just going to leave him right there for now. It looks like I actually might need to make him just a touch bigger. And maybe even drag him back into place. There we go. Now, obviously, your eyes immediately go to him now. He's very much dominating the page. We don't want that, but we'll come back and fix it here in just a moment. Now I need to add something that evokes passenger net promoter score. So let's go back and find shape fill for this rectangle. Let's add another picture, stock images, and let's go type in airplane again, see if there was anything else that we might be able to use. Kind of scrolling through here, not really in love with any of those pictures. Try plane. Let's see how this picture works once we fit it into position. Again, we're going to need to select fill here, and then we can try, kind of dragging this into place and making sure that it's large enough to take up most of the rectangle that we have. That looks pretty good. And for the last one, passenger experience, maybe for this image, we decide we don't want a person picture, even though, again, I think that the human element does help with this infographic because it's about passenger satisfaction. It would be kind of weird if there were no human element in an infographic about customer satisfaction. But let's just go ahead and type in airplane again, and let's see if any of these pictures of an airplane really speak to me. We'll try just using this picture. The airplane's nice and small. I might be able to use that. Actually, maybe this one works even better. The reason that I want a small airplane is so that I have, a little bit of freedom to kind of resize everything as needed. Although I have to admit, I'm not really a huge fan of that, so let's go back and see. I'm going to go back to our fill options, and I think I'm going to go with the first picture that I picked. Because now I think the airplane is a little bit too small, and it's also not centered the way that I wanted it to be. So let's try our original picture and just see how this works. It is totally fine to not be completely confident which picture you want at first. In fact, the picture didn't even load, so let's go back and repick that airplane picture one more time. There it is. Now, picture format, let's crop it, let's fill. And that will work. I wish that the the wings weren't cut off so much in this image, but hey, in the interest of time, we're going to call that good enough. And now we're just very, very quickly, I don't know if I can do all of this on all three pictures at the same time, but yes. So I'm going to go ahead and just hold down Control and select all three of these pictures. And very quickly, I'm going to click on Picture Format and Color. And I'm just going to go ahead and see what these look like if I grayscale them or if I add just a touch of color here. Let's see. I think that teal accent color works pretty well. Now, let's go and click on each picture one at a time, and if we want to darken things up a little bit or play with the contrast, this is the perfect place to do that. And that looks pretty good. Again, all I'm trying to do is just add enough of an impression of, a human element into this. Just something to kind of help tell the story and kind of engage, a potential user of this infographic or viewer and make them want to keep scrolling a little bit. Now, there are a couple of very nitpicky things that I'm left with. You might notice a bit of the blue poking out here. So you can try just kind of moving or toggling the images just enough to kind of obscure that overlap. And then you can always cover up some things by just relayering. So in this case, I'm going to grab my header here, bring it to the foreground. So that's perfect now. This one looks good to me. And my airplane down here, I see that I have a little bit of dark blue poking through up here at the top. So let's go ahead and make this image just a little bit larger. And we're going to go ahead and kind of drag it up a little bit. And then I'm going to bring my header to the foreground. And now everything looks great. So the last thing that we're going to do is we're just going to add some additional sort of iconography over here to the far right to just continue to make people want to keep looking through this report. So let's go ahead and add, a circle over here. And I'm going to add a outline to this. I'm going to click on More Lines. And I'm going to use a gradient here, but I'm going to try to keep it fairly light. So I definitely want an orange color pop and some blue in there. And then let's try having the orange in the top left corner. And let's see what it looks like if we do a dark blue fill. That is pretty subtle even for me. So let's try just darkening that up a little bit. There we go. You can play with the spacing as much as you want here. For me, I think I'm actually going to move this entire section up just a little bit here. And then I'm going to add more of these for each section here. And once you have them all in position, we're just going to go ahead and align to our center. And I just realized that I forgot to add my last one down here for my recommendations. One thing that I am noticing is that the corner of my squares here kind of touch these circles that I'm dropping off. So I'm just going to go in here and let's see what happens if we make these completely transparent. Notice now that we're not really having the same problem here with that sharp rectangular corner sort of intersecting with these circles. So I'm going to do the same thing over here. I'm just literally selecting the color that makes up this light blue and making it transparent enough that the background blends in, and I don't have this hard angle here on these section squares. Okay. Now, for each of these, let's go ahead and add an icon or something that sort of illustrates what these sections are. So the first one is going to be an icon, and since this is the view from 30,000 feet, let's maybe see if we have another airplane icon that we want to use. Maybe we want to use this window here and see how it looks. I mean, after all, we're at 30,000 feet. Makes sense that we would maybe be looking out a window. Kind of drag this into position. And let's see. We can play a little bit with our colors here. Kind of like the white, but I'd like to see what the oranges and blues look like. I do think I'm just going to go with the white. Even going to experiment with maybe putting a drop shadow behind it. That looks pretty good. Now we need to add a demographics icon here. So let's go ahead and add, let's just look for people, maybe customer. Okay. That looks pretty good. After all, this is customer data, and our customers are telling us how they feel about their experience. So I think that the speech bubble makes sense. Once again, we're going to use our drop shadow here. Now we need something for Net Promoter Score. So maybe we want something like a speakerphone or something to sort of visually demonstrate that the higher the Net Promoter Score, the more likely these people are to, be cheerleaders or advocates for us and hopefully sell our brand to other or new customers. Finally, we have the passenger experience. So let's look for an icon that has maybe a thumbs up or a thumbs down. Maybe what we're really trying to highlight is what people don't enjoy about their experience flying on Sweatpants Air. So let's use a thumbs down instead. And for our recommendations, let's look for something like maybe just a simple list. So I kind of like this clipboard with the check marks. Let's make it a little bit smaller to fit it in here into our circle. And of course we'll use a white background and a drop shadow. And that is pretty much it. I think now we're getting to the place where it's probably time to go ahead and export this and bring it into Power BI so that we can start actually laying visuals and interesting text on top of it. So the first thing that we're going to do is go to Save As. Let's go to our folder, and we're going to save this background as background infographic. Right now we're just saving the presentation, but then after that we can go ahead and save the JPEG as background should be a fairly large background image because it has all of this interesting color on it. So let's go ahead and hop over to Power BI Desktop. Whoops. Let's delete the visual that I accidentally put on here. Come on. There we go. And now we're going to go to our canvas background, and instead of using this test background JPEG, let's go ahead and grab our new background image, and we're going to go ahead and fit that there. There's our text box that we put in there a while ago. Everything is fit just perfectly. And okay, now we're ready to go ahead and start bringing over our data visuals and adding these to our